First Presbyterian Church's Mustard Seed Foundation. Today's program brings you an interview with Toby Smith about his new book, Crazy Fourth: How Jack Johnson Kept His Heavyweight Title and Put Las Vegas, New Mexico on the Map. Toby Smith began his journalism career in 1966, writing and editing for newspapers, magazines, and a wire service. In addition, he has taught writing and reporting at University of New Mexico, Ohio State University, and universities in South Korea and Romania. He has been a Fulbright Senior Fellow, an IREX Fellow, a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellow, and a James Thurber Writer in Residence. Currently, he is a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow to small independent colleges throughout the USA. Smith has written 18 books in addition to his newest book, Crazy Fourth. In Las Vegas, Crazy Fourth is available at Paper Trail, 158 Bridge Street, and at Books of the Southwest, 247 Plaza. Both stores are offering a 10% discount for today's attendees. Please welcome Sharon Vandermeer, our interviewer, and Toby Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone, and hello, Toby. I'm so glad that you're here in this venue of virtual space. We're going to have fun talking about this book. As I told Toby earlier, Crazy Fourth: How Jack Johnson Kept His Heavyweight Title and Put Las Vegas, New Mexico on the Map by Toby Smith. I want to read a couple of things that have been said by other writers, and it kind of encapsulates what this book is about. And as I was telling Toby earlier, I got the book a couple of days ago, so I haven't read it all, but I read about half of it. Very entertaining book. If you think I'm not a sports fan, I have to tell you, but I found this book both interesting and entertaining. And I found out some things about Las Vegas that I did not know, which is one of the wonderful, the beauty of historical books of history about Las Vegas, is you always learn something you didn't know. So this is from Jack Kavanaugh, author of Tunney, boxing's brainiest champ, and his upset of the great Jack Dempsey. Mr. Kavanaugh said, filled with an assortment of colorful characters, Crazy Fourth is a highly entertaining and funny account of the events that take place in the run-up to a heavyweight title defense by the great Jack Johnson in the unlikely setting of tiny Las Vegas, New Mexico. And the other comment comes from, let's see, Richard Meltzer, co-author of A History of New Mexico Since Statehood. Many know of this 1912 fight, but few realize that the contest was a complete fiasco, from the first day of planning to its controversial last round. Toby Smith uses his wit and storytelling skills to write this boxing equivalent to Jimmy Breslin's classic, The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. And as you read this book, you get it. It is absolutely fun to read. So what was your inspiration for Crazy Fourth?
Well, I as a young man back in Connecticut where I grew up, I liked boxing. I just took, I wasn't going to be in a boxing match or a fight or anything, but I liked the sport. And when I became a sports writer for the Albuquerque Journal, I attended a number of fights in Albuquerque. And during that time, I thought, I didn't know about the Johnson fight with Flynn until, much later. And so I discovered one day, I ought to go up to Las Vegas and maybe try to figure out something there that I could see, and maybe somebody would tell me about the fight or that kind of thing. So in the fall of 1994, I decided to go there and see what I could see. And the first stop when I made that in Las Vegas was at the Las Vegas Optic, because I thought, you know, this is a newspaper. They'd have all sorts of things in there, and it said,
Excuse me. Jeff, Toby, can you continue? I don't know what's
yeah,
happening here.
okay, I can continue. So I saw the Las Vegas Optic, and I went in there and I told this woman that what I was doing, and did she have any clippings or things of the fight? And she was too busy, I think, or couldn't find the material. Or she said, well, you really ought to go to New Mexico Highlands University, because they have some machines that could look at what do they call microfilm machines that were there, and I could look at them and find out things. So I did. I went up to Highlands University, and I got a hold of one of those really ancient microfilm machines where you have to stick your head in. You know, not like today where you can just look at it. Or you had to put your head in this, almost like you're sticking your head in a chimney to find out if there's. Anyway, so I went to Highlands University, and I stayed about 3 hours getting microfilm, looking at it. Saw some pictures of Jack Johnson in old black and white film, and I was there a while, and then finally I said, well, I've got to go. I got to go back home to Albuquerque. So I walked outside, and I went toward my car, and I saw that there was this neon sign parked right nearby, and it said Joe's Ringside Inn. Joe's Ringside Inn. Now, you probably would have to be an old timer at that place, because it isn't anymore. I've been back to Las Vegas several times since, and the Joe's Ringside is no longer there. It was on I think in a main street. I don't remember the name of the
side street.
Side street, yeah. And so I went in there, and in this bar, and there was actually busy that night, and I noticed there was a mural on the wall that said about the Johnson Flynn fight, and I said, wow, this is going to be good. I'll get all I need right here. And so I looked at the mural, and then a waitress came over to me and asked did I want something to drink, and I said, you know, I had maybe have a beer or something like that, and I did. And she said, I said, who's Joe? And she said, oh, that's my uncle. His name is Joe Rayball, and he owns this place. And so anyway, I learned that piece of information. I didn't know whether this was that important, but it was a beginning of something that I thought might bring somewhere for me to go. And then I, thought this is I can get information. So anyway, I continued to stay in Albuquerque and did other things. And at one point I left New Mexico and went to Seoul, South Korea on a job where I was an editor of a English language newspaper. And while I was there, I just kept saying to myself, I need to write something about that Jack Johnson, Jim Flynn fight. And I'd forgotten a lot of it. So back to New Mexico I went, and driving back up to Las Vegas. But before I got to Las Vegas, I called somebody on the phone in Las Vegas, somebody had referred, you should call this person. And so this person happened to be a fellow named Tito, and he owned an art gallery in Las Vegas. And so I called Tito, and I told him what I wanted to do, and could I come up and talk to him, and could my wife come along? And he said, oh, sure. So we drove up to Las Vegas, and I met Tito, and I met his wife, Mary. Probably you folks know them, do you?
I know
Yes,
Tito's.
yes.
Tito's pretty well known in there. Anyway, yes. So Tito, I visited with Tito and his wife for quite a while. Susan and I did, and I got information from him. And he said, "Come on, we're going to walk over to my house." So he left the gallery, and we walked over to his house. He said, "This is where Jack Johnson lived while he was in New Mexico." And I said, "You're kidding?" And he said, "No, this house." And it was a, it was a much older place, and up on the front was kind of a balcony, which has a story in itself. I learned later, but this is where not only did Johnson live there, but an area around the house was where Johnson trained. He brought a training group with him, and they set up bleachers. They had to pay to get into Johnson, watch him work out before the fight. So, that was fascinating to me. And I said, "This is great. I think I could. I didn't think I could live in Las Vegas, but it began in my life as a place that was really quite nice and cool, and I liked it. And I've been back there several since, and to the new hotel. Susan and I stayed there. The hotel that had refurbished from Jack Johnson's days. You know that one? Yeah, Castaneda. Oh, it's a beautiful place. And so we went up on the train there to go to Las Vegas.
Enough.
So that's enough of that. So let's go back to.
She wants to ask you a question.
Oh, who wants that?
No, she's going to ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't
Please.
think I have to ask you a single thing. You know what you want to tell us, and you're going to tell us. But I just want to go back to the whole research thing, because history, of course, solid research produces the best information. And you debunked some, I guess, long-held myths in your research, especially about one of the promoters or one of the people who funded, I guess, the fight in Las Vegas, Mr. O'Malley. Through your research, people believe for
I know
years.
a lot about it. Yeah.
So to me, the research that you did was amazing. How long did it take you to research for this book? And then
Well, when I came back, when I started going back to Las Vegas and saw Tito and everybody, I said to myself, I've got to get more information. So one of the places I decided to go to was not the Highlands University Library, but the New York Public Library. So I went in there one time, once, and this was probably 20 years ago, would you say?
Well, 2015.
1916.
No,
2016. 2016. I went in there and I told the woman that I wanted to see some things that I had already found online that's in the New York Public Library. So she said, "Well, you're going to need a card." And so I said, "Okay." And so she made out a card for me, and then I showed her my driver's license, and she said, she said, "Albuquerque, New Mexico. Is that in the United States?" And I said, "Yes, it is, the last I heard." So anyway, I went in there and I got some information, and that started a long chain of things, of research. And that's what this book is all about. It's about research. I went back to Albuquerque, and I went into the library, Zimmerman Library at the University of New Mexico. And one of the great things that the Zimmerman Library has is you can get microfilm and use it, not microfilm that they have. They'll send it away. In other words, if you wanted to see information about something in elephants in Ohio, they might tell you, "Well, here's a Columbus, I can get you a Columbus newspaper on microfilm," and maybe they'd have it. So I wanted to get as many towns across the country, big cities, that might have some interest in the fight, or say something, or talk about history of Johnson, history of Flynn, and I got lots and lots of microfilm over time, and I got a lot of stories out of this. I spent hours in there, but it was worth it because how could I get that information anywhere else or any other way? I wasn't around for the fight. I don't know anything about it. So I was learning as I went. And so that started to roll, and I got microfilm, and one thing led to another, and I kept getting excuses, making excuses myself, because I'm the kind of writer, I don't jump into things immediately and do them. I look at other things, and that's what, I take the time out and I'm doing something else. Earlier than this manuscript for the Jack Johnson Flynn fight, I had been trying to write a novel about Las Vegas, nothing about the one, because this was about a prize fight and a little girl and from a home that was not a good home for her to live in, and her father beat her and beat her mother. Anyway, so I got that idea, and I said, Toby, you got to drop the novel idea. You're not a novelist. Nobody wanted to read the novel. I couldn't get an agent, so that's gone. So back to just a straightforward book about Jack Johnson and Jim Flynn and Las Vegas, and that started the ball really rolling. I could use the microfilm that I had, and then I talked to people. I made calls.
People in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, helping.
Yeah, I mean, everybody had something that they knew about the fight around the country almost, and things like that. So I started working on the book project, and it took me probably about total of about 3 years, and putting it together, and I learned a lot. I certainly learned a lot about Jack Johnson and Jim Flynn, because those are the two.
I'm sorry.
Those are the.
Did you find that it was easier to sort of start structuring the book as you went along, or did you sort of gather facts and then sit down and write?
I got a fax and sat down and write, and I said, this could be a chapter on this. And I'd already had something. I found something. So I said, that could be a chapter, because one of the chapters, for instance, was about stereotypes in racism in and around the fight. Everybody was calling Jack Johnson, a bad name. And, they let this get away, and it was a different era, a different time, 1912. I mean, it was just something that was just part of it. So I said, I think I could make a chapter out of that. And racism was all about everything at that time. I mean, nobody had nice things to say to Black people. That's the way it was. And some people looked away, and then some people, said, hey, that's what we do around here, or something like that.
Right.
So anyway, that was a chapter, and I began to figure out how I could get another chapter. And one of those things was on the cars that people in 1912. You don't want to ride a car in 1912. I mean, it was the craziest thing. Nobody had driver's licenses. Nobody knew how to drive. Everybody wanted to drive. And a lot of people wanted to drive fast, and they had no business even driving a car. But there were cars aplenty in 1912. And I got a good chapter out of that, because everybody was doing crazy. Even Jack Johnson's whole group had a car. Everybody had a car. They wanted to have a car. And so they were getting in accidents all over the place. There were no signals on turning or anything like that. So those were that was another chapter I had. So this book is made of chapters. And I'll look at that.
I don't know if people can see this or not, but there's a picture in the book of the roadster that Jack Johnson owned, and this is part of his part of his crew
Yeah,
that he had.
yeah, really, that's good. That-
Talk a little bit about Jack Johnson began carrying a gun, a handgun, because of the threats he had received.
There were a lot of threats on Johnson because he was black and
Successful.
and special, and he was
Successful.
what?
He was successful.
He was successful. He had a lot of money. He drove a fast car. He loved
And
cars.
he had a white wife.
He had a white wife who came with him. So you can imagine that in
Well,
1920.
in truth, he had 6 wives over time, 4 of them
Yes,
white and
he did.
2 of them black.
Yes, he did. That's true. You're
This is-
you're right.
To me, this turned out to be so interesting because, I mean, that's an overused word when it comes to something like this, but from a history point of view, it taught me a little bit more about how people thought in that era, and reminded me that racism has been around for far too long in this country, far too long. But it was interesting to me that I think you said that after 2 divorces from black women, he got tired of that and decided that, I don't know, he decided they weren't worth the effort or something. I don't know. But he turned to marrying white women instead. And the lady who was pictured while he was here was really quite lovely. she was so pretty. At least in the pictures she was really quite lovely.
Yeah, Johnson could easily, women drew him to him. He drew women to him, and women wanted to go. Yeah. They saw this man. Here was this man who was great. He was large. He was well-meaning. He was actually quite polite. He even around women that he didn't even know, he was nice, and he was wealthy, and he was a pleasant man. And it's males that get all upset over that.
Yeah, that's true. I have a question and I think to clarify, Jim Flynn was from Pueblo, Colorado.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, so he came into Las Vegas with as little contact locally as Jack Johnson, except people knew who Jack Johnson was. Yeah. And I guess they knew who
they had
Flynn
already
was
fought.
Too. They had fought once before. Yeah.
In 1907, and Johnson knocked Flynn out. As a matter of fact, he was put in a hospital. That was the first time they met, and it also led to eventually going to Tommy Burns out in Australia to get a fight, and then coming back to the United States, and now he could get against Jim Jeffries, who was the great white hope. Jack Johnson wasn't a great white hope. Jim Jeffries was. He was very white, and he was the heavyweight holder of the world champion title. And nobody could beat him. He's a huge guy, very strong, very muscular, and he didn't ever want to fight a black man. People had said once Johnson knocked out Flynn in 1907, he was ready to go, and he said, I'd like to get a fight with Jim Jeffries. And people said, why do you want to fight him? He's a black man. And Jim Jeffries said, yeah, okay, but I'm the champion. And he held off from doing that with Johnson for a long time. And finally, a decision was made, and Johnson said, okay, I will fight Jim Jeffries. And that fight was in Reno, Nevada in 1910. And they had a lot of people there. They had 50,000 people, I think, in that stadium in Reno. And so Johnson got in the ring with Jim Jeffries, who was just America loved this man because nobody could even touch him when he fought anybody. And he was white. So Johnson knocked Jim Jeffries down 3 times in a row, just like that. And the audience, the spectators who were there at Reno, their jaws dropped because Jim Jeffries is the greatest fighter ever, they felt. here was this black man who knocked the great champion down 3 straight times. And, that was it.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't quite it, because then with that fight came America's racism right to the front. There were riots in every big city in the United States over this fight, because, black man isn't supposed to be the world heavyweight champion. Well, now he was. Jack Johnson was the world heavyweight champion. Right. And at the end of the fight, told one newspaper reporter, you know what? I don't think that I could have beaten Jack Johnson on my best day. So he was that good, Jack Johnson.
Yeah.
And
once the 2 camps, the training camps, got to Las Vegas, Jim Flynn's was out in the Montezuma area, and
yes,
Jack Johnson was in that, well, now in Tito's house that we know, and there was some trash talk from the Flynn camp, and especially from Jim Flynn himself. He said
yes.
some pretty I don't know, I thought irresponsible things, like he told several people just to shoot me if I don't win this fight.
Yeah. And he dropped the N-word a lot.
Yeah. Let's see, I'm getting off track of my questions, but you're so interesting, I don't have to really hear. So as an historian, what were the telling aspects of this event that intrigued you enough that you wanted to write this book?
Well, I thought it was just filled with color. And when I started to look at the microfilm, it was every other article was something that made me think, this is amazing. This is the funniest thing I've ever heard, or this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. I'm going to make a chapter out of this and that and this and that. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started doing that. That's when I knew I would probably have a book, because everything was different from the chapter before, and it was maybe even better than the chapter before, but it was very different from the chapter before. So it was great. I didn't expect this, but it just came upon me, and that just worked out fine. So I was glad.
Did you pick something that you wanted to read for us? I don't know where you would start with picking one thing that represented your book, but if you have an excerpt or a couple of them, that would be fabulous.
Okay, sure.
And if anyone has a question that they would like to ask Toby, you can type it into the chat to me directly, and I will ask the question.
Okay, this was a chapter called, as we just were talking about it, rolling out the stereotypes.
Don't read too much of that one.
Okay, I'm told don't read too much.
Don't read that one.
I'll interrupt you if it goes too long.
No, I'm read a couple of little items.
That's okay. No.
I'm not going to read the chapter. It's just okay. It's got. Anyway, the last it's talking about color. Johnson learned that. Let's see. The Las Vegas Optic was surely one of the worst newspapers in terms of using language that today would be entirely inappropriate. That's your community's newspaper. Johnson's mother and sister came to Las Vegas for a couple of days. They were to be in charge of the culinary departments and see that Johnson's table is supplied with the best edibles prepared as only a Southern mammy can cook them. Now, you can't even get close to something like that today. So that was that was one of the odd things that made a chapter. I'll give you another little thing here. Find something.
The car thing.
Yeah.
We marked it.
Okay, I got one. At the end of the fight, a misbegotten mess. That's what I called this chapter. Let's see, there's a better one, I think.
You can do more than one.
Well, here's one. The rewards of an ugly afternoon.
Mm.
Shortly before the prize fight began, members of several Chicago homing pigeon clubs got together and shipped 18 pigeons to Las Vegas. The birds would be used for liberation from the arena immediately following the bout. The Chicagoans believed that the pigeons might set a distance record and bring a sense of peace and gladness to the event. Those club members in Chicago did not know that pigeons had already gathered in Las Vegas arena, not homing pigeons, but ticket buyers who fell for one of the greatest cons in Fistiana's long history. So anyway, I started having fun with that. And then there's another items about, Flynn, at the end of the fight, Flynn said he was in great shape. He was good. He didn't hurt me at all. It was getting into the ring. He was fine. Well, at the end of the fight, did Flynn get hurt? On July 5th, St. Louis Post-Dispatch provided this medical report. One for Flynn, one split nose, one flattened nose, one cut eye, one deviated septum, one cauliflower and oral adornment, and one absolute drubbing. Drubbing means pounded to all heck. Here is what medical report on Johnson. One tiny blister on his lower lip, the gift from a Flynn headbutt.
Oh.
Now, you have to understand, when Flynn fought him, and he had fought him before and done terrible, and this time he got the idea, I think I can beat him. I'm pretty sure I can beat him because I got a new thing going for me. And that new thing was he would jump up in the air, literally off the ground, off the mat in the ring, a foot, and try to knock the top of his head, of Johnson's head, into Flynn's head. Because if this is the way Flynn thought he could beat Johnson. He couldn't beat Johnson on Johnson's worst day. So here he is. He's leaping up in the air and going head first into Flynn, and Flynn is just covered with blood. Johnson has no blood on him at the end of the fight. So I mean, it was kind of one-sided, I would say.
Yeah.
The
The fight. I'm gonna. Okay. Did you say something else?
Yeah. Here's what
the part about being in Santa Fe.
Because Flynn Johnson went to Santa Fe once and spent time there for a night. Actually, when he was looking for a house, and when Johnson moved to New Mexico, he was looking for a house in Las Vegas that he thought was one he could move into. And Flynn, his manager said, "Well, I'll get you one, and it's up here, and it's blah blah blah." He got there, and it was a dump. It was an absolute dump. I mean, nothing worked. It was his retinue didn't want to stay there 1 minute. He wound up going down into town and in toward the house that Tito's house. So that's where he spent a great amount of his time, in that house. But
he was traveling around Santa Fe.
Yeah, when he was in Santa Fe.
The last paragraph.
Yeah, okay. Those riding in Johnson's automobile left Las Vegas. Okay, they did not reach Santa Fe until 6 p.m. He was having an exhibition in Santa Fe. The exhibition took place at 9 p.m. And then DeBray, Cutler, and Skelly, these were three local fighters, perfectly looking like perfect specimens. He added that when he stood beside them, Johnson, the threesome, according to this is probably the Santa Fe paper, the threesome resembled pygmies. Anyway, before he took to the stage at the Elks Club, Johnson said, "I wish to show the people of Santa Fe that a boxer can be a gentleman. The impressions I leave with you that are I desire to be honorable both to myself and to the sport to which I am an exponent." So that you really have to say is a nice thing for Johnson to say, and I think he was. And I think now Flynn was a different person. Nobody liked Flynn. He was nasty to fans. He did not like black people. He was just an unsavory character. And Jack Johnson was a gentleman deep down.
Toby, we have a question from our attendee, Dennis. Why do you think the fight disappeared from history? The PBS documentary didn't even mention Las Vegas.
I know. Is that the Ken Burns one you saw?
Dennis?
That's the main
Yeah.
one, the Ken
Yeah.
Burns. Yeah, that's a pretty good one, but it's a lot of things are cut out of it because they didn't have the right stuff for the footage or something. It's not a bad one. It's pretty good.
Why didn't they mention Las Vegas, she asked.
But so what was your question? And then
Dennis wanted to know why it sort of, this fight it was kind of a major deal, and yet it has kind of disappeared into the annals of time and forgotten.
it did for a while. It did. You're right about that. When I was growing up in Connecticut, I read some things about Jack Johnson, but I didn't, what is he doing? Is he fought somebody? Is he boxing? Whatever. So I really didn't know much about him until I came to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And started to hear about him.
Another question is, what did you discover about Jack Johnson's acceptance in Las Vegas as you were doing your research?
I think people like to see. Some people wondered, he liked fast cars. He liked to go very fast. He never wanted to go slow, ever. He loved cars, and he liked getting behind them and getting behind the wheel. And that was something that he really liked to do. And I think there was a lot of, not jealousy, but a lot of, there's that world champion. He's riding a car around our town.
Mm-hmm.
They're not supposed, shouldn't he be training? No, not interested. Yeah, he had that's true. When Jack Johnson trained, and he did train, and he didn't have to train because he'd already knocked Flynn out, as I said, and put him in the hospital. Who's going to win that fight again? No, not Flynn.
There are a couple of things I wanted to get to. During that era, of course, not of course, but during that era, in many states, black fighters were not allowed in the ring with white fighters. It was okay in New Mexico, but there ended up being quite a lot of misunderstanding even about that. The governor of the state at that time said he was going to get behind the fight and support it all the way, and then turned around not.
Yeah, and his reasons were a few of them. I don't think McDonald was a racist. I don't think that wasn't his thing. Because I read a lot of letters that people had written to the governor about this and that, and before the fight began. And I think McDonald, for one thing, he had a feeling for Las Vegas. He got married in Las Vegas way back, before the fight, or way after the fight, or before the fight, I guess. And so he liked, his family liked Las Vegas, but he decided that Las Vegas really wouldn't be a good town for something like this to happen. And that was a mistake. And I don't think McDonald really wanted to have that happen, but that's what happened. The whole place became a mess after the fight, and everybody went which way, and it didn't seem like, it was it was so one-sided,
There were a couple of things too that how did Las Vegas, New Mexico, and the people who were promoting this fight end up getting together? Because it seemed pretty far-fetched that a heavyweight championship fight would be held in a small town in New Mexico.
It does seem that way. It does, I felt that way too. It's, but Mike Tyson has come to little places too to have fights, although that's a whole nother story of long ago, Mike Tyson. But I think the thing was that, I think he worried. I think the governor worried about the fight. Just is it going to, what's it going to cause? Is it going to, is it going to be a significant thing? Is it going to be a good thing? Well, it turned out to be just a thing. It was a world championship fight, but it wasn't a good fight by any means. They lost money. No fans weren't happy with it. The big thing, it just was not something that people would remember forever. And it was kind of shock, in the history of boxing. If you look down in the 1800s, early 1900s, you'd have to look hard for that fight, because there are so many other better fights in America then. And I think the fight was interesting because Jack Johnson was there, and he was a world champion. But beyond that, after Jack Johnson left, what kind of a city was Las Vegas? It would be hard to say. I don't know. I don't live there, but I think it got better. They got a university, they got this, they got that. But even people in Las Vegas vaguely remember it, but they don't know why they remember it.
Well, I think there are a lot of reasons for history. Once it gets past a certain point, people just don't pay attention to it unless it has something to do with them personally. But I have a question here. What was the size of the turnout at the fight? Now, I know in reading your book that the expectation was that they were going to have 10,000 or more attend this fight. Ultimately, I think there were, you said 3,500. How did it fail so badly?
That's a good question, because there weren't a lot of people decided that driving there would be risky. The roads weren't any good. No, there were no roads really there. So, and train rides, they were expecting a lot of people to go by the train and come, and some did. It was a small town. It didn't offer enough to go there. And what are they going to do? That was the hard thing. I mean, a world championship fight these days would have to be in a huge city, where people could come from, distant and, draw big crowds and that sort of thing. There were no crowds at the Johnson Flynn fight. And yet it was a fight that people sort of remember for various reasons. And
I thought it was funny that I guess more so in the Jack Johnson camp than in the Flynn camp, they charged for people to watch him train, right?
Right, yes. And Johnson did not. Johnson, you could come in and watch him anytime you wanted.
Yeah. He did seem to be a man of the people. He really liked to engage with them.
He loved to visit with people. Jim Flynn could care less about anybody. And that didn't do the fight any good. When people started to see him, they don't want to, then they're going to call a match. Even Flynn's manager said, you've got to be nice to people. Yeah. And Flynn didn't want to be nice to people.
The people who surrounded, especially Flynn, seemed to be constantly giving him misguided advice or well-intended advice that he didn't take.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And after the fight, which Flynn said he won, of course. You know, he would go. He had this one newsman from Nevada, Colorado, not Colorado, but in what? Colorado. He was a newsman there, and he was the greatest backer of Jim Flynn. He thought Jim Flynn was God, and he wanted to do everything for Jim Flynn. And he wrote. He was the only his newspaper. He had a little newspaper in Colorado, and his newspaper was the only newspaper in the country that said Jim Flynn got cheated in that fight, and that's why he lost.
Yeah.
And Jim Flynn should have won the fight. Jim Flynn, he said, actually what he did say was Jim Flynn won the fight.
Sounds like a recent political campaign, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
No.
I have a couple of more questions.
Sure.
One was, did you see the 1970 film with James Earl Jones, The Great White Hope?
Yeah, yes.
You know, you mentioned in the book that the person who was considered to be the Great White Hope was never Jim Flynn. It was Jeffries, wasn't it?
Oh, Jim Jeffries was always the American champion, the world's champion, and
But
that's it. He was white, yes, he was very white.
But in terms of that term, the Great White Hope, is that he was considered?
Yeah, but so what happened? What happened was after Jeffries lost to Johnson, everybody was. Reporters everywhere said, we've got to get another fighter to fight Johnson, to fight him again. And he, you know, they tried to get all sorts of people, but no one was gonna get in with Johnson. And Johnson finally died, and I think in 1918. And
Johnson?
What?
Johnson?
Johnson did.
Okay.
No, Johnson died. No, and Flynn did. Flynn did.
Okay.
Flynn did.
I thought, did Johnson
Johnson lost his crown in 1918. He
Okay.
lost. He went to Cuba. He was old, tired, run down. He'd spent a spell in a penitentiary in Leavenworth, even. But he went there and he taught guys how to box. He was only there about 1.5 to 2 years, and so he had fought this fight in Cuba, and he probably should have said that should be I'm the champion. I'll retire, because he was just he could hardly he hadn't seen his mother. It was sad. He wanted to see his mother again, and it was kind of although he lived actually a fairly long time. And
I think you said in the book that he died in an auto crash in '54.
Yes, that was another, and that was racism. He claimed it was racism, and it probably was. He had gone into this diner to get some food, and they said, you got to go around back on the stoop, and we'll leave something for you.
Oh,
and,
golly.
Yeah. So,
Just a little note here. Mary Chavez, Mary and Tito, which I did not know, have both been suffering from this COVID, and are recovering and are getting better. But Mary texted Susie Saidi and said to tell you that they send you their best and say hello to you. I'm sorry they couldn't be here today.
two terrific people.
Yeah, absolutely. They're some of the best. As much as there is something else I wanted to find out here. Let me see. Oh, as a sports writer, how would you have reported on this fight as it played out?
Oh boy, great question. It's really hard to say, but I would have called it a disaster if I was a sports writer. But that's 1912. It was a disaster from every angle. It didn't make sense. But that's what was fairly amusing when it made it fairly crazy.
Yeah.
On the July 4th.
I have to tell you, this has been a hoot. I really enjoyed talking to you. I wish we could go on longer, but we're going to kind of have to wrap this up. What else would you like to add that you would like for people to know about your book?
Okay. Well, by the way, I was headed, before the pandemic came, I had all sorts of offers to take this book, including the trail. What is it? Trails?
Yeah, paper trail.
Paper trail.
Mhm.
And all these bookstores. I feel sad. I mean, because they didn't get a chance to read the book, or the books. Who knows what happened there? It was really kind of a crazy thing within itself. I mean, I had no control over it. One day there's this, and the next day there's a pandemic, and no bookstores are open.
Well, a couple of things. I know that Dennis at Books of the Southwest at Frankie Antiques has it, and Nancy Colaleo at Paper Trail has it. And I also know that I'm going to be, when I finish the book, I'm going to be doing a book review, and you can count on it being favorable.
Okay.
And there, I am making a recording of this, so that I will send you the link when it's up, and you can share it with whomever you want to. I think you, the efforts that you have made to create a really delightful book have come to fruition in a great way in this story about Jack Johnson in Las Vegas, New Mexico. And it kind of gives me a little bit of pride in our community, because it sounds to me like Las Vegas in that era was, as it is now, says, come on down. We're all here, and we welcome whoever you are, from wherever you come. And so in that regard, I really appreciated that you didn't, there's not a lot about Las Vegas people in it, but there just seems to be that sense of we were a welcoming community then, and we're a welcoming community now.
I think that when I go there, it really is a nice place, and it's such a clean, beautiful city.
Yeah. I got a note here from Janet Burskins. She just posted a few photos from CCHP's image library on the Las Vegas Citizens Committee for Historic Preservation Facebook page, and I guess they're related to that era and the Johnson fight. Again, is there anything else that you wanted to add? Are there any other questions that I overlooked here that someone would like to ask?
I don't know.
She's looking to see if there's anybody that's.
Oh, right. Let's see if I have a question. I don't know. I don't have any questions.
No, if anyone in the audience has a question that they haven't.
Okay, I'm in the audience. It's up to this person.
Okay, then thank you again, Toby, very, very much. I'm so glad that our paths crossed. I love writers. I love good writers, and I love this story. I think it was really
And that's so nice. And thank you for inviting me.
You bet. Las Vegas Literary Salon looks forward to seeing and hearing more from you.
That's a lovely name, the Literary Salon. I looked at that and am I supposed to go to a literary salon? No, it's a great name.
We hope it inspires people to think of literature in a very fun, good way.
Nice name.
You.
Thank you for coming.
No.
Well, you're not coming. Thank you for being there.
Everybody else. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Mary Rose?
Thank you for attending this presentation sponsored by the Las Vegas Literary Salon. And thanks to our sponsors, the Las Vegas Arts Council and First United Presbyterian Church for a Mustard Seed Foundation grant. A special thanks to our guest, Toby Smith, author of Crazy Fourth, How Jack Johnson Kept His Heavyweight Title and Put Las Vegas, New Mexico on the Map. Available locally at Paper Trail on Bridge Street and Southwest Books inside Frankie Antiques on the plaza. Mention you attended this literary salon for a discount on the book at both locations. Please join us the fourth Sunday in February for our next event, Get Lit with Las Vegas Literary Salon, a panel discussion. We also invite you to look at and follow our website, lvnmlitsalon.org. Thank you again. See you next month.
Thank you.